Now, we begin preparing the upper anchor point. Start by laying the two wooden beams parallel to each other. When you do this, make sure there is enough space between them so that your hand can comfortably fit through. This gap is not strictly required. The construction also works if your hand cannot fit through. However, leaving this space makes the assembly much easier because you can directly reach the bolts and nuts inside the anchor point while tightening everything. If you choose to place the beams closer together so that no hand fits through, that also works well. In that case, you will later reach the bolts from below between the rotating crossboards near the shaft. Both approaches are valid. The important part is that you plan ahead and choose the option that feels more practical for you. Next, keep in mind that when you cut the rectangular opening in the plywood panel, it must be large enough for the shaft to pass through freely. The shaft should have a bit of clearance inside this opening and must not touch the plywood anywhere. A small amount of extra space here prevents binding or contact during rotation. Before we continue, here's something useful. Without a parts reference, this build can take a lot more planning and guessing. That is why I created a parts list based on my actual setup. It is available as a starting point to compare with parts you can find locally. You can find it on my website. With that in mind, place the two wooden beams parallel on your work surface. Take the bearing and place it on top of the beams. Align it so that the mounting holes of the bearing sit cleanly within the wooden beams and can later be bolted through them properly. Now take the plywood panel and lay it on the top of the beams. Once everything is aligned correctly, fix the panel temporarily with screws. This is only to hold it in position so it cannot shift while you continue marking and measuring. Next, place the bearing back onto the wooden beams and align it carefully. Make sure that all bearing bolts will later pass cleanly through the beams. Once the position is correct, mark the bolt holes directly onto the wood. At the same time, mark the position where the shaft will later pass through the construction. After that, remove the bearing and mark the areas of the wooden construction that will later be cut out. These markings define both the hand access opening and the shaft clearance. Now flip the entire construction over and add the second plywood panel on the opposite side. Fix this panel temporarily with screws as well, just to keep everything aligned. Then, mark 4 additional bolt positions that will later hold the entire anchor point together. When marking these holes, make sure they are not too close to the edges of the wooden frame. The holes should be placed more toward the center of the beams. This is important to prevent the wood from splitting or tearing out under load later on. Once all markings are complete, the next step is to drill through all marked points. These holes must go completely through the entire construction, from top to bottom. Later, the threaded bolts will pass through these holes and be tightened with nuts to create a solid and secure upper anchor point.